Tonight, Susan is joined by two very special guests as we focus on Susan's Heartspace system to transform addiction. Arno Jaffe is a prominent immigration attorney and has been a guest on our show several times in the past. And Arno has used the Heartspace system with a remarkable outcome that we will discuss tonight. And Bowie Jaffe is Arno's son and the star of tonight's show. Surprise! Welcome, everyone. I'm so thrilled and excited to be here and with everybody, and it's going to be an extraordinary, informative show. And I think we'll start with Susan explaining to us the first time that you happened to meet Arno. What was up with that?
Thank you. So the very first time I met Arno, we were talking, and I said, "Oh, do you have any children?" And, I asked in a very innocent way. And he said, "Yes, I have one son who's in graduate school at University of Arizona, Tucson, and I have one son who's a homeless person living in San Francisco." So as a life coach who's committed herself to supporting people in turning around and transforming any kind of family crisis, personal crisis, career crisis, health crisis you can imagine, you can just imagine. So I asked Arno, would he be interested in learning from me how he could affect this situation and turn it around? And I gave him my card.
Boy, and that's the start of something extraordinary. Yeah. Arno, I wonder, what did you think when you met Susan and she suggested a solution to this challenge that really had seemed hopeless to your family, because I know that Bowie had been gone for so long?
I was given the gift of desperation. I knew that everything that I had going for me, all of my communication skills, everything else that I'd ever done, hadn't worked, and I didn't think it would work. So I was desperate, and desperation is sometimes a great driver. And Susan believed that there was a solution. And I would have been a fool not to have begun working with her. And this process changed my life, and in a very large part helped to save the life of my son.
Thank you, Arno. Boy, no, now I'd love to hear Bowie. I wonder if you'd be willing to tell us about your life in San Francisco, and I wonder if you'd be willing to tell us about your drug use.
Sure. Well, my life in when I was in San Francisco, I was my addiction. My addiction was me, and the real Bowie, my soul, wasn't free to express itself. So as my addiction, I loved drugs. Loved. They were my passion. They were my love. And I would just use as much as I could, whenever I could, and it was my lifeblood, being that I was my addiction then. My days were made up of, pushing a shopping cart, screwing around with friends, lots of philosophizing, and lots of thinking and walking, lots of walking, and it's really not anything that the way they show it in the movies or anything like that. It was in a lot of ways very spiritual, or the intention was to be very spiritual, and there was a lot of desire and drive to be a good person, to do good things. One time I remember I was riding a bus down to a bad part of town, and the bus driver sped up a little too fast, and an old woman fell over, and I caught her. on the bus, and it was beautiful, and I felt so great that day. Like, yeah, I know, I'm a doped up dope fiend who's gonna do anything to get the next fix, but I helped an old lady today. I had intentions to do good things, but they were under the stranglehold of the addiction that had a hold on me. And if I was given a choice between do something good for someone good, or get loaded, if the choice was right there or there, I would always have to choose to get loaded. So it was an enormous hindrance. And the reason why I couldn't break free of that was because of the way that I felt about those drugs. There was just no letting go of that. Letting go of that would be like saying, I'm never going to eat again, or I'm never going to drink water again, or I'm never going to be in the company of people again. It was that kind of an attachment where it was that much of a part of my life. And so that's how it had me under the stranglehold, and I couldn't get out of it. It was as though I was powerless to get out of it.
Boy, that sounds pretty intense. What an experience.
If I may add that there was a lot of pain involved with it too. It was either really, really euphoric, or the other side, which was absolute suicidal despair.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was about half and half.
Yeah.
So that's how I would describe my time in San Francisco. Yeah.
Thank you, Bowie. What a
Sure.
picture. It's very clear what you've experienced. Thank you for sharing that. Always that loving heart. Thank you. I wonder, Susan, why is it so important that one family member, why is it so essential they have to really be committed? And how did you get Arnold to focus like that?
You know, when you said that you were your addiction, this is what so many people don't understand. So many people who are watching at home, so many people who will watch this show, maybe for years to come, who don't understand the distinction. And every time I've worked with a family member to support a beloved family member who's torn between the euphoria of addiction and the utter despair and suicidal thoughts, of course, it's always that same dynamic. And so you've got to be able always to focus on who this soul is that's underneath
That's
the
right.
addiction. And I had never met Bowie. Yet I knew that underneath this person, from the little bit I later heard from Arno, I knew that underneath was someone who had longed for a peaceful life, longed for a joyous life. As I said to Arno many times, Bowie didn't run to a life in San Francisco, living on the streets. He could not have. Nobody would run to that. He had to have been running from stress, tension, a lack of unconditional love and acceptance. And as soon as I teach either a parent, a spouse, a child, or a sibling to be able to communicate unconditional love to a family member who's in the midst of addiction of some kind, the result is always the same result. The person who has been unable to break free of this addiction suddenly can, because now the support of unconditional love is there. When you offer someone unconditional love, any one of us, we can do almost anything.
Boy, thank you for the clarity on that. That's very important, how powerful love is. Well, gee, now I'm wondering, Arnold, how about you? Bowie was, I know, on his own for 4 years, and neither you nor his mother had spoken to him for 10 months when Susan began coaching you. And then 10 days later, Bowie called Santa Barbara. What happened then?
Before I answer that, Gigi, I want to say one thing so that the folks out there listening who might be dealing with this understand that I had the gift of desperation. I was willing, but in my heart I didn't think it would work. I was willing to give it a shot, but I just want you to know I'm not the poster boy for positivity my whole life. You know, when Bowie called, I sensed something in his voice, a tone. I sensed what I thought was a willingness to come home. And I went there. Susan had been coaching me on intention. And my intention was I was going to go to San Francisco and I was going to bring him back. I didn't think any farther than that. And I remember my car broke down and I had to get another car, and it was arduous. But I got there and I saw him, and he looked bad. His skin was gray. His eyes were dead. And I could see what the drugs had done to him, that he was beaten. And I, gave him some empathy and asked him if he was willing to come home. And he said yes. And I moved fast. And then the adventure began. Because his mom and I knew he had a drug problem, but I guess we didn't really want to know what. So I had an opportunity of living with Bowie for 4 months, and in close quarters. I lived in a little tiny guest house, and I got to know what Bowie's drug of choice was, what his life was like, and I got to know what it was like to live with an addict. And he'd be okay, and then he'd leave the house, and then he'd be gone, and I wouldn't hear from him. And then he'd call me because he'd gone out, gotten high, and was messed up. And he'd come back, and he would get okay again, eating and sleeping, and then go out. And I had so much support from Susan, so much coaching. And basically I knew that my job was to listen to him, and just to let him know that I was doing my best to understand where he was at. And I wasn't doing any of my old tricks of giving him advice without being asked. I wasn't making it about me. I wasn't going, oh, I love you and everything is going to be okay. I just listened. And I think gradually he built up a trust. But I know it had to be hard for everybody because he was in his addiction, living in my house in Santa Barbara. But I was not powerless as I had been before. And I would, sometimes I would call Susan and say, what am I going to do next? And again, I know I got above and beyond the support that I could have ever hoped for. And, to know that before I did something, because normally I'd think it and I'd do it. That's the way I operated. And to know that you can ask somebody for advice and that you don't have to act immediately was something I began to learn, and I think it made a difference.
Thank you, Arno. What a huge gift just to really listen and be present. That's wonderful. Now, Bowie, I wonder if did you expect actually that you would be coming back to Santa Barbara after your dad came up and the second time? That's pretty extraordinary.
I certainly did, actually. It's kind of a funny story. First, I want to clarify something. As far as the 12 steps, first I just want to make really clear the 12 steps are enough. They are enough if you choose them and you use them. They weren't enough for me at that point because I hadn't chosen them yet, and I hadn't chosen to use them. So I just want to make that message clear throughout this, that the 12 steps are enough. That's how we get clean, and they're beautiful. So my father, I knew it was getting time to call my dad. I knew it had been several months since we'd spoken, and my depression was becoming more severe, and it wasn't something that I was bouncing back from. And every day that went by, it got worse and worse, and it became scary. And I knew that the day was coming soon when I was going to call my dad, just to talk, or probably because I needed something, you know. But it was time to call my dad, and I knew that he was going to want to come up and visit me. And I knew that I was going to say, sure, come up and visit me. And I knew that when he did, he was going to offer to take me back down to Santa Barbara with him. And I knew that when he said that, I was going to have a hard time saying no because of where I was at, the way that I was feeling. And so sure enough, I called him. He said, may I come up and visit you? I said, sure. And, he came, we stayed in a hotel, he bought me a steak, And then sure enough, he said, would you be willing to come back down to Santa Barbara with me? And that was the beginning of like my willingness to be like, okay, well, I'll let go of my attachment to San Francisco and my attachment to these streets and to the same person, the same people that I know, the same person that I go to. I know I'll be able to find bad people in Santa Barbara too. It was a lot of that, and I was like, okay, I'll do it. And so sure enough, I went down to Santa Barbara with him. And it wasn't long before the way that I'd gotten in San Francisco, I tried being like that here in Santa Barbara, and I got picked up by the law immediately. And it started a chain of events that led to changes in behavior on my part, and it was actually very beautiful, very painful, but very beautiful. And so yes, to answer your question. I was beginning to feel willing to go back to Santa Barbara. That's kind of how it happened. Yeah.
That's really interesting, your thought process and how it worked out. Oh, thank you. I wonder now, Susan, how did you motivate Arnold to really be so loving continuously and accepting of Bowie no matter what was going on?
Threats.
Oh boy.
I know, that Arno loves his two sons more than life itself. And his sons love him that much as well. And after first meeting, Bowie, it was very clear to me that Bowie's like an angel. I mean, Bowie is all heart. His dad had bought him a pair of shoes at some point, and when Arno went back to San Francisco, Bowie had given away the shoes, but not because it was anything but a normal thing to do. Somebody needs shoes, and you're stoned. It would never occur to you not to give away your shoes when your heart is that open. I mean, he's obviously been clean and sober for many years now, and thank goodness your heart didn't change. That would be a great loss. So I just kept reminding Arno again and again and again what was at stake. And there were two things that I had to keep reminding him. If you tell people what to do, they will make you wish you hadn't. You have to be very, very clear about calming yourself down. And they've got my 6-part conversation. Thank you, Fred, for putting it on the screen. So Arno had to master self-empathy, which is done silently. You have to be really calm before you try to talk to anybody about something this stressful and difficult. Then Arno had to master empathy, the ability to really connect with everything that Bowie was feeling and needing without sticking Arno's own feelings, preferences, thoughts, ideas, let's do this, none of that. Only when Bowie had been clean and sober for some time was Bowie likely to be able to hear number 3, which is self-expression. You have to be able to say to someone, would you be willing to hear my thoughts about it? And the person has to be sober and compos mentis to be able to say, yeah, I'm really interested in what you have to say. And when someone is coming off drugs, and particularly, really insidious drugs like crystal meth, and a long period of drug use or alcohol use, the person's going to say, no, I don't want to hear what you have to say, because, they're in pain. So little by little, Arno was able to stick with it. And as you heard from the rest of the story, obviously we're sitting here today because ultimately Arno was able to use the whole 6-part conversation to motivate Bowie.
Thank you, Susan. What a great formula your Heartspace system has turned out to be. Here we have it.
Thank you.
Boy, and Arno, I'm curious how difficult it was for you to have Bowie staying with you and then once a week ending up going out all night and...
Wow. First, I want to echo Bowie in my love and respect and support for the effectiveness of the 12 steps and hope as well. But sometimes you need outside help. And Susan gave that to me. It was crazy living with Bowie. I came home one day and a lot of my CDs were gone. He had sold them to buy drugs. Nights when he didn't come home, I remember a night looking for him, going in the bushes in Alice Keck Park and some of the other parks in town, and not finding him, but seeing other people living there. I remember getting a call from a restaurant in mid-morning, and they said, your son is sitting outside of our restaurant, and going and seeing him and just seeing that he was gray. But I kept getting support from Susan. People around us, everybody else had given up, and they said, let him hit bottom or let him go to jail. And I wasn't willing to accept that. I knew that jail wasn't a place where he would learn. And if I could keep him from hitting bottom, as I wanted to, and I think eventually you have to reach a certain point. But just being able to practice self-empathy and empathy, and for a long time, in the first 2 or 3 months, that was really all that it was about. So that really made it easy for me. All I had to do was listen. I didn't have to have a speech ready. I didn't have to have any anecdotes that I was going to have. Personal experiences, talk about my recovery experience. And then we would get into the next part where I would be able to tell him what I was feeling. And I could say it in a different way. I could talk about what I was feeling and needing rather than a way that I would have expressed it before. And I remember a time when he said, I'm sick and tired of, you giving me this, willingness and all this, all this NVC gobbledygook. And I said, I can understand that. I can understand that. But I am committed to doing everything that I can to learn a new way of thinking, acting, talking, and being in support of you. And I'm not going to stop. And that's why I'm doing it. But it was wild. It was wild because he was in and out. He was in and out. But I was someone different than I had ever been as his dad, communicating with him from the minute that he came home. And again, I would call Susan, and Susan would coach me, and I would get that, and I would get that kind of support. And I just have to believe that the response that he got from me as a student of Heartspace was vastly superior than the way his dad, without getting coached, would have responded. And I think that made a difference. I know that made a difference. How's that?
There you are. The results. Due to the evidence, yes.
Empirical evidence sitting next to me.
Beautiful. Well, now, Bowie, what about you when you first returned to Santa Barbara? I wonder if you remember being unwilling to go to detox or rehab.
Sure, as long as I was using, it was out of the question. I didn't even want to hear it. I mean, it was a joke. Go to rehab. I was like, okay, fine. As long as there's a good connection in there, as long as I can still get loaded, that's fine. I can do whatever you want. I'll go wherever you want, as long as there's good dope there. Then I can be fine. Then I can be happy. Then I can that was the illusion that was pulled over my eyes, and that I was powerless to overcome by myself. And, you know, until that spark of willingness got into me, that's all I could do, you know. And yeah, there was just, I guess what I'm saying is there's, you know, there's the addiction and the person himself. The two are very different, you know, and the people that knew me when I was getting high and getting loaded, they didn't really know me. They knew my addiction, you know, and yeah, I became willing. I became willing one day, and at the point you're talking about, I was not willing at all. It was a very different mindset that I was in then, as opposed to a few months from then. It was a very different mindset in that all I wanted to do was get loaded, because I was my addiction. Yeah.
Thank you for your honesty.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh my, that willingness is the key factor, obviously.
Absolutely.
Now, how about you, Susan? How did you go about supporting Arnold constantly to be giving empathy to Bowie and for him to be able to enter detox and rehab and then sober living? Was this always your plan?
Yeah, there was no alternative. And there's no way that you can live the life that Bowie was living for very long. You can't do it. You know, it's not possible to live on the streets for 10, 20 years and survive with any kind of a quality of life. Mm-hmm. So I had to constantly remind Arno of a number of things. Number one, tough love is no love at all. Tough love is not love. Tough love is what you may get from a sergeant in the Army, but you'd never call that love. The idea that in this day and age that a young man can survive in jail and come out with his health intact is nonsense. Look at this young man, you know, you've been watching him, and call me and tell me how he would have survived in jail or prison. I give lectures in prison, and I tell you that the young men and the older men in prison are not doing well. So the idea that we can let somebody hit bottom who we love is no longer valid. Maybe 50 years ago, some other time in history, not now. This is not an option. If you were watching this show because there's someone you love, man or woman or child, who is addicted to something or some kind of behavior, you would have to tell yourself the truth. You don't want to do what Arno did. It's too much work. You'd have to pay me. That's true. But please don't watch the show and say to yourself, you know what? Tough love works, and my kid can end up in jail, and he or she will be fine. It isn't true. I've worked with people after they've come out, and it's a terrible thing that happened to them when they were inside. So what I said to Arno every single time Arno called is, empathy, you can do this. You can do this. You have to do this. You love your son. We're not giving up. And Arno did it. And he did it in the face of hundreds of people telling him that he was crazy. Because Arno knows hundreds and hundreds of people. And I think at the time, every one of them called you to say, you know, what are you doing? Because this is a program that is not AA. This is not CA. This is not DA. This is not GA. I work with people who are also in those programs. This is the program that's separate from it. It's the additional support that AA was not created to provide. And so this is something new that a lot of people had never heard of. And the truth is, it was the very last chance. And it worked, as we knew it had to.
Beautiful, thank you. And I appreciate hearing, forget about that tough love. Very nice. And boy, how about Arnold sharing with us really the hardest part of these early days before Bowie was clean and sober, and how did Susan help?
Well, Susan was a strong motivator behind me to just keep doing it, and it enabled me to know that that going back or giving up wasn't really an option. I had to go forward, and it was great to have something something to work with, and I know that there was support from Bowie's mom intentionally that things go well. And along the way at the end, there was wonderful support from Commissioner Deborah Talmadge. And in a world of effort plus grace leads to success, the most important support was higher power, God, whatever you want to call it. Without that, the light wouldn't have gone on for Bowie. And it was ultimately Bowie turning on the light. My job was simple. I just had to not blow it, not get angry, not make ultimatums. I just, it was like, whatever I do, I don't want to piss Bowie off so that he gets on a bus and goes back to San Francisco, because if he does, he'll die.
Yeah.
And that's a pretty strong motivator. And there was also a lot of love and support. Certainly confusion from those people who loved and supported Bowie and people in our family and our friends. But I had my own short time experience in the 12 steps, so that I had a little that under my belt. And then I had this newfangled approach of communication. And for anyone that gets involved in Heartspace, I not only was able to be a part of Bowie's recovery and sobriety, but I learned something myself about what you talk about on the show that I use every day. I started doing this in 2004 in the spring, and I do it now. I do it every day. Every day I get to practice this. Every day I get to practice the 12 steps. Every day I get to know that there's something out there bigger than me that's making it all happen. And all that I can try to do is be a part of that. I had a friend who sometimes said, sometimes our only job is to not make it worse. So, And when I practice, when anyone practices this, you become a teacher in the best way. I admire people who walk their talk. I don't want to hear about how great you are, how spiritual you are, how involved in the program you are. I want to see it.
That's right. Yeah.
And I like to hear myself talk. And I like to think I'm the greatest thing since sliced bread in some regard. And with the combination of the tools that I've learned and the people that I hang with, I get to be right-sized and know that I'm just a part. And I think there's this one last thing that was really powerful in that I am learning, and I learned that there's more to life than me and how something affects me. And that I live in a world, I live with family and friends and loved ones. And they're a part of that little world of mine. And this has been really helping me lately. But the opportunity to be able to learn, the opportunity to be able to listen, I mean, what a gift to just be able to listen. And I wasn't a very good listener up until the time I met Susan. And I have, decades of making it all about me and wanting to have a little speech ready before you finish talking. And I'm learning. And, I'm an example of the transformative power of this work. That it can happen. If it can happen to a guy like me, with the help of a great coach and a higher power and in this instance, a son who didn't give up, a son who stayed with it and let it unfold. Believe in the transformative power of working this program and other programs. And there's nothing that you can't accomplish. It won't happen.
Thank you for sharing.
Amen.
That's good, yeah.
Yeah, very powerful, being able to really listen and accept, love. Well, hey, how about you, Bowie? What was your turning point for you, actually, when you were in detox or rehab?
Well, what comes to mind when I think of my exact turning point was when I was in the Santa Barbara County Jail, and I had been to court earlier that day, and the commissioner had told me that she took a liking to me, and the court took a liking to me, and for that reason, they wanted to really give me a lot of help. And the way that they do that is they say, well, we're going to really give you as much consequences here as we possibly can. She said, with all the stuff that we have on you, we can technically give you up to 4 years in jail. And, whether or not that could have really been a reality, I don't think it would have come to that. But, they were using these scare tactics, and they said, we can put you in jail for an indefinite amount of time, technically. We're allowed to do that. Or you can go to rehab. And I was like, great, I'll go to rehab. And the first thing that I thought was like, yeah, I'll be in rehab. I can walk right out the door. I can find my old friends. I can start the cycle over again. I'm free to get high again, which of course is no freedom at all. And so that night, in my jail cell, I had a moment when I was like, I fathomed the possibility of, or even just the concept of getting clean. I thought, just what if somehow it was possible? And it struck me, if that was possible, I could do things that I've always wanted to do. I could go to school. I could gain education, and I could be the good person that I always wanted to be. And maybe not have to compromise my morals. Maybe not have to steal from people who I love, and hurt people who I love. And just that it struck me, and this wave of euphoria that, like, wow, I could do that. I could do good instead of bad. And I mean, not to say that I always do good and I never do bad, but I'm doing a whole lot better than I was when I was out there using, progress. I've made progress. Not perfection, but progress. And it was all in that moment when I was sitting on my jail cell, in my jail cell there, and I had thoughts that I had never had before in my life. I had never, the whole time that I was using, the whole 5 years that I was using methamphetamines, it was like a light came on that had never been there, a light that showed on a place that had never seen light before. Mm-hmm. And I started to entertain these ideas of, it is possible to get clean. And in the back of my head, I was going, well, that does mean that you're not going to be able to use drugs anymore. And I was just like, well, I'm not going to think about that. I mean, all it means is I just have to not use drugs right now. I just have to not use drugs today. If I want to, I can always go back. I can always go back and use again. But today, I'm just not going to. And just this wave of euphoria, I can't even describe it, was hitting me, and everything just lined up, and I was like, well, and it's great. I'm going to be getting out. I'm going to be given the opportunity to go to rehab. That's a huge opportunity that not everybody gets, and so that, I'm going to be like pampered, and any help I need is going to be right there. That's nice, but nobody even needs to necessarily go to rehab if they can't afford it or aren't able to. That's what the 12-step program is there for. Because nobody can get, a real addict can't get clean on their own. Not all by themselves. That's impossible. But we help each other, and that's how we do it. And so yeah, I just remember thinking, and wow, and the help is there. The 12-step program is there. The support is there. So all I have to do is do what these people tell me to do, and I'm not going to get loaded again. Because these people aren't going to tell me, the 12-step people, they're not going to tell me to go get loaded. They may tell me things I don't want to hear. They may say, tell me work I have to do, or things that I have to do that I'd rather not do, but they're not going to tell me to get loaded. So if I simply do what they tell me to do, no matter how hard it is, I can and will stay clean. It was just like, wow. It was like my soul breathed a sigh of relief that I didn't have to abuse myself anymore, and my addiction was out of luck because I couldn't use anymore. And so, it was like that, and if I can just add one little part to that is that I used my addiction against itself. My obsession to use, my obsession to do anything in the world to get loaded, I used that same obsession, except now I was doing anything in the world to stay clean, going to any lengths to stay clean. And but it was the same exact mentality that got me loaded and got me obsessed with using. It was the same exact part of my brain that it was that got me clean. That that same obsession, except instead of drugs, it was sobriety. So yeah, that's.
Oh, I love that. The energy just transformed. Oh,
Yeah,
that's
that was it,
great.
yeah.
Thank you for sharing.
And it can for anyone. It can for anyone.
That's the great news,
So
right
it's a
there.
fact. It's been proven. Yeah.
Well, thank you so
Yeah.
much for sharing that.
Yeah.
Very powerful information. And Susan, I wonder if you always, did you always know that Bowie would be able to get clean and train Arnold to give continuous support? How did that work out?
Having become certified in Herman brain dominance, which, Fred, if you'd put that map up, I'd really appreciate it. It was very clear to me that what was always missing in anyone who's an addict is they don't have enough of that lower left green quadrant. Take preventative action, establish procedures, get things done, is reliable. That's safety, order, consistency. Those parts of the brain are not sufficiently developed in anyone that I've ever worked with who's in a 12-step program or who has an addiction. And always that lower right brain, that red quadrant, which is the emotional quadrant, passion, affection, need for emotional intimacy, need for appreciation, all of that, that's always overdeveloped in anyone I've ever worked with who has an addiction, or anyone, whether they're using or they're sober, clean and sober. So I always knew that it was always about changing the brain. And when I gave a workshop at Passages, which is a very high-end rehab in Malibu, that was exactly the workshop that I gave. That everyone who's an addict needs to simply understand his or her brain, needs to be able to do what Bowie came to naturally. Bowie just said that he went from the obsession with addiction to the obsession with the gym, which he had had before. You were always you loved going to the gym, you loved working out, all of that, but then that became even more important, and really being focused on being healthy and turning all these things around. And that is the evidence of someone who's changed his brain. You can't do it otherwise. And everything that Arno shifted in Arno was proof that Arno had changed his brain as well. Because Arno would not have been able to give empathy to someone day in and day out if Arno was still the emotional lower right brain up and down person. Only because Arno was able to be more peaceful and more consistent could he do it. And Herman brain dominance, which is one of the things I teach, is used by 90% of the Fortune companies in America. These are the most successful companies in America. They use this because it's a very simple, clear way of understanding all of their employees, all of their customers, all of their potential employees and their potential customers. But I'm one of the few people who uses it to just understand families, because the same rules apply.
Well, thank you, Susan. Boy, this is just so encouraging. It's exciting. Well, So Arno, I wonder, how did you really manage to support Bowie so that he didn't give up?
I was able to be in a place, like I said before, where initially I wasn't making it worse. I listened to him. You know, I'm an attorney, and I actually was his attorney when he got in trouble with the law. I was probably and I think more than anything else, the idea was to keep doing what I was doing. You know, the support that I had, the experience that I'd had in AA, the coaching that I was getting. Susan said it too. I was just able to consistently be there, listening, giving empathy, self-expressing, going back to empathy when I was getting a response that indicated Bowie was charged, and letting him know that I was there, that I was accepting him, and that I was dedicated to a new way of responding. And it's a very powerful way to be. We created in these months a new dynamic of communication, and that's what I did. I just kept doing it, and believe me, I prayed a lot, I hoped a lot, I meditated, and that was it, and it worked.
Thank you. Now, Bowie, I wonder if you could tell us about your life now.
You know, now I've been given the opportunity to go back to school. You know, I got into a community college. I took some classes. I found that I could be very successful at that, and that was a great feeling. You know, I love my family. I get really excited about my family, and I love playing music. I play the cello now, and that's something that I got into shortly after I got clean. And I remember when I used to use, I would be sitting at the side of the street, and you know, a mother with her child would cross to the other side of the street so that they wouldn't walk their child by me. Now I'll be on the street playing my cello, and a mother and her child will cross the street to the side that I'm on so that their kid can see the cello. And it's like things like that you can't put a price on. And you know, somewhere inside me, the addiction I'm sure will always be alive. You know, that the addiction is still in me, and still wants to use and still misses using. And it taps on my shoulder every night before I go to sleep and says, "Wouldn't you love to have a few pills right now? Wouldn't you love to just do a little hit of your methamphetamines that you love so much? Oh, just think of how much you would love that." You know, and I just say, you know, yes, you know, okay, that's nice, you know, maybe in another life, but not right now, not today. Today, I'm choosing to stay clean and stay sober. I'm going to take it easy. I'm going to sleep. I'm going to eat a little bit, and I'm going to face the challenges that life has, things like earning a living, you know, things like being a useful person, things like relationships, things like being successful. I mean, these things are hard enough. These things are hard enough even when you're not using. And then if you are using, if I'm using, I can forget it. If I'm using, then I'm lucky to be alive. I'm lucky to survive a day. So, you know, my life now it has its ups and downs. It has its challenges and it has its rewards. It's real. My life is real. If drugs and using is anything, it's fake. Drugs make you feel fake. It's a fake thing. You know, when somebody shows up and they're drunk or something and they're like, "Hey, you're my best friend," you know, it's fake. But now, you know, it may be hard sometimes, it may be painful sometimes, it may be beautiful sometimes, but it's real. And that's the only way to be, is real, as far as I'm concerned, for me in my life. So, yeah, that's kind of my life today.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
awesome. Congratulations.
Hey, thank you.
Now, Susan, I wonder if you'd be willing to add anything to the viewers that you'd like to share so they can understand more about this.
So first of all, any one of you can do this. This is not that complicated. It requires a certain commitment, and it requires a willingness to study some tools and skills and to master them. I've taught this exact same system to many parents, to many spouses. 100% results. 100% clean and sober results when I have one committed family member who masters the skills of the Heartspace system for sobriety and uses it. Guess what? Some of them master it and don't use it. What are the results? Not good. So you have to be committed to learning it, committed to using it, and you've got to stick with it because you never know when the person you love will need empathy from you, just as we all do. And the beauty of this is so many of the people that I've taught who are themselves addicts use self-empathy themselves when they're feeling stressed, thinking about whatever the addiction was. Now, there are some other tools and skills we didn't have a chance to talk about tonight, but if you've watched me on the show before, you've heard me talk about goal-reaching skills, which is that focus, no matter what, I'm reaching this top of this mountain no matter what. And that was what I literally gave to Arno and every one of the parents or spouses that I work with. You have to have that commitment. So goal-reaching skills. Also whole brain thinking. If you can understand that whole brain thinking model, it's so valuable because then you're going to be able to let go of judging your relative. You're not going to judge them. You're going to understand them. It's going to be easier to have that empathy. And finally, there are plateaus of peace, 7 plateaus of peace that I teach. So you can see your loved one reaching each plateau of peace as they get clean and sober and they've got more time under their belt and they're getting coins, etc. in the program. You can see this. And as you see your loved one living life again, then it's just that much easier. And the bottom line is every one of you can do it. And I offer a free 1-hour telephone session. And my number in the website comes up on the screen here regularly. So there's no reason that you can't have an hour with me. It's free, and I'll tell you, and then you'll decide if it's something you want to do or not. There's no right or wrong. This may not be for you. If it is for you, please do something for your family today.
Thank you, Susan.
Can I just say that there's not a lot that you can do for your child who is an addict. And what Susan offered me was a way that I could do something myself to be a part of the solution rather than the problem. And that's what's so self-empowering and so amazing about the tools. And I urge you, any of you folks that are out there, any of you that are having difficulties with your kids, addiction is a family disease. And there's not much that you can do about your child other than pray and hope for it, unless you're willing to learn a new way of communicating and being a part of the solution rather than the problem. And it works.